Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Paul Simon, and in today's Onshape step-by-step tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a realistic render in Onshape's Render Studio. So the model we'll be using today is a self-centering dowel jig. I chose this model because it allows us to apply different types of material to it, like paint, metal finishes, or even a wood texture. You can see that I've added a tabletop to the assembly, which we can finish with a realistic wood grain. Alright, so let's create our rendering environment. To do this, just click the Insert New Tab icon, the plus sign in the bottom left of the UI to create a new Render Studio tab. And this is where Onshape takes our CAD model and starts turning it into a photorealistic image directly in the browser, so no special hardware needed. Behind the scene, it's powered by NVIDIA iRay, which simulates real light and materials so we can instantly see how our design will really look in the real world. So the first thing to do here is to choose the object you want to render. And actually that brings me to another tip. I often create a render assembly to help put my product into context. In this case, I've added a wood block and the tabletop, and that's the assembly that we'll be using for our rendering today. So on the left side, you'll see the scene list. This is where all the parts, assemblies, and appearances for our current scene are organized. By the way, the UI has changed slightly since I recorded this video, but the layout and the way it works are still pretty much the same. Right, so from the scene list, you can see the complete structure of your assembly, including sub-assemblies, the context part here, like the wood block and tabletop, and you can even drill down to select individual faces if needed. And then below the scene list, you can find the appearance section. It contains all the appearances used by the geometry in the scene. Here's a handy tip for you. If you take the time to define your materials in the Part Studio, Onshape will map them to matching appearances in Render Studio. So for example, as you can see here, the stainless steel appearance is already applied to the screws. Now, at the bottom of the page, you will find the libraries, so the appearance library and the environment library. Now let's start with the appearances. As you can see, Render Studio offers a very extensive list of appearance options. On the left, the appearances are organized into folders, and since we want to apply a wood appearance, we can either browse through the wood folder or simply search for a specific type of wood using the search bar. So let's say we want to apply an oak appearance. We could simply search for it, then drag and drop it directly onto the tabletop in the scene list. The result looks great, so we'll keep it as is. And since we are already working with wood appearances, let's go ahead and apply an OSB appearance to the wood block. This time, instead of dragging and dropping into the scene list, we'll apply the appearance directly onto the 3D model in the graphics area. You probably also notice that every appearance you apply in Render Studio gets added to the list in the appearance section, keeping everything organized and easy to manage. Now, you might be thinking, what if I'm not completely satisfied with the result? No problem, you can always tweak the appearance settings using the panel on the right. That's what we call the appearance panel. And this is where you can view and adjust all the parameters of the selected appearance to better match your desired result. Notice how I adjust certain values until I get a result I'm happy with. As you use Render Studio more, you will see that many appearances share the same key properties. So here's another tip for you. Take the time to understand the most common ones, like roughness and bump strength, and how they affect the result, because this is going to save you a lot of time in the long run. Alright, great. Let's move on to the self-centering block. This time, we'll apply a metal appearance, let's say stainless steel. There are plenty of options to choose from, but I'm picking the shiny smudges variant because it lets me easily add some realistic imperfections. And that brings me to another quick tip. As I like to say, it's all about the details. So if you want your renders to really stand out, don't hesitate to add imperfections like scratches or fingerprints, because they can make your renders feel way more believable and lifelike. So just like before, I'll start by tweaking the material properties, adding imperfections using settings like dense scale, smudges weight, stains weight, and others. Another quick recommendation, I always suggest starting with the scale setting, because often just adjusting that one value can be enough to achieve the result you're looking for. Next, let's move on to the clamps. So we're going to give them a metallic paint finish. Let's go with orange. You might notice I forgot to select the left clamp before applying the appearance, but that's not a problem. I can just copy the appearance from the right clamp and paste it onto the left one. The flakes are a bit too big for my test, so let's make them smaller. Let's say 0.05 millimeter. And I'm also going to increase the scale to 2.5. Now, let's say that I want to apply an anodized aluminum finish to the bushings. I could simply select them directly in the graphics area, but I'd like to show you another method. You can also filter the scene list by name. So if I just type bushing, I can quickly find and select them. This is a simple example, but this really comes in handy when you're dealing with tricky render studio scenes that have tons of parts, part studios, and assemblies. Alright, I'm not really happy with the result, especially the color, so let's jump into the appearance panel and tweak a few things. I'm gonna change the color using the mixer. And by the way, I'm doing this on the fly, but of course you can set an exact value in RGB or X if needed. Okay, so we are almost done now. Just the dowel pins and screws are left, so we are going to give them an aluminum finish using the glossy fingerprints variant, which is actually one of my personal favorites. And you will see that after spending a bit of time in Render Studio, you'll end up having your own favorite appearances too. In fact, you can even mark them as favorites, so you don't have to search for them every time. Alright, so we are done with the appearances. Let's move on to the environments now. So essentially, an environment is what adds lighting to your scene. It uses high dynamic range images, so HDR images, to give it a more realistic look and feel. And just like the appearance library, the environment library is also quite extensive. There are lots of options to choose from. So let's try a few to see how the environment affects the final render. So we'll start with this one here that's called Onshape. To apply it, just drag and drop it. And when you do that, you will have two options: apply lighting only or lighting and background. And since I plan to add a custom background later, I'll just go with the first one here. Right away, you can see how the surrounding environment is reflected on the shiny surfaces. We can clearly see the trees mirrored on the polished surfaces. Let's try a few others, like Canary Wharf, which gives a slightly darker tone, or the one just next to it, Cambridge, which has a very different vibe here. I like to say that it's a very iterative process. I like to try different environments until I find the one that I really like. And just like with appearances, if the result isn't perfect right away, you can always make a few adjustments from the environment panel. So from there, you can modify things like image rotation, lighting intensity, shadow directions, and more. Another tip I'd like to share that personally saved me a lot of time: try to pick your environment early on when you're rendering, because the lighting and background can totally change how your materials look. Alright, so the main part of the work is complete. Appearances and environments are all set. We can now focus on the final touches like model positioning, camera settings, and tessellation. So let's start with tessellation. you have the ability to adjust the tessellation settings for individual elements in real time. So if any surfaces appear faceted, you can increase the tessellation to achieve a smoother, more refined result. Also, to get the best preview before rendering, I usually recommend maximizing the graphics area by clicking the icon in the bottom right corner. This switches directly to full screen mode and hides all surrounding panels, so you can focus entirely on the image. I also recommend turning on Render Scene right away. When you do that, a preview box will appear showing the render's output area. This box is going to change depending on the resolution you pick, so it helps you get a clear idea of what's going to be rendered. Now that I have my limits, I want to reposition the model in the scene, and one tool I really like for that is Field of View. It's a camera setting that helps you control the perspective and depth in your rendering, so you can decide how much of the scene shows up and how the model looks from the camera's position. Position and rotation is also very useful. Obviously, you could just drag the model around to get it where you want, but if you want better control, I would recommend using this tool instead because it lets you fine-tune the position and rotation in every direction. And since we're talking about positioning, here's another tip that can really make a difference. You've probably heard of this already. It's called the rule of thirds. Essentially, you split your frame into 3 equal parts, both horizontally and vertically, and try to place your model along those lines or where they cross. And you will see that it just makes everything look more balanced. And last but not least, depth of field, which is probably the camera effect I use the most. If you've ever used a real camera, you will quickly recognize the terms here since they are exactly the same. It's a tool I like to use when I want to put the focus on a specific area or part of my scene. Do I want this part to be sharp or do I want it to be blurry? So just to give you an example, I'm going to set a really low F number here and focus right in the middle of the model. And you can see the blur show up both in front of and behind the model. It's a bit too blurry for my taste, so I'm going to increase the F number to 22, for example. And for the focal point, I'm going to select the corner of the centering block on the fly here. Alright, so I'm quite happy with the result. So let's move on to the final step, which is rendering the scene. So I'm going to pick the resolution first. Let's pick the 8K UHD resolution. And just a heads up, by default, you won't have access to this resolution. This output is only available with the Advanced Render Studio. The standard Render Studio is limited to 2.1 megapixels. So if you need more and you want to upgrade, don't hesitate to contact us. Okay, so Onshape just generated an image in the format we defined, PNG in our case, and you will find it in the bottom right corner of the document. I always recommend creating a folder called render or something similar to store all your renders. If you're like me and enjoy comparing your results, you will quickly end up with a bunch of tabs piling up in your document, so that's a good way to keep things organized. Alright, I hope this tutorial was helpful for some of you. It's part of a series focused on the Render Studio tool. In the next one, we'll dive into topics like collaboration, branching and merging, configurations, and updating models. And of course, in the context of creating great renderings. Thanks for watching and see you soon.